Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. I'm Maruf Raza. With Prime Minister Manmohan Singh scheduled to meet President Obama in Washington in the coming week in a major boost to Indo-US ties, the United States has made the unusual offer to co-produce mainstream defense equipment in India. The US Deputy Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter, on a 3-day visit to New Delhi, said that defense relations are a key part of the defining partnership between United States and India. And later in the show, Al-Qaeda is in the news again. The new Al-Qaeda chief, Ayman al-Zawahiri, has issued his first specific guidelines for jihad by urging restraint in attacking other Muslim sects and non-Muslims, as well as in starting conflicts in countries where jihadis might find a safe base to promote their ideas. Our guests this week are Ms. Lisa Curtis, who's a Senior Research Fellow on the Asia Program of the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Ms. Curtis analyzes India's relations with the US as well as America's interests in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and generally in Southern Asia. Also later in the show, to discuss the guidelines issued by the new Al-Qaeda chief, we have eminent Islamic scholar Professor Akbar S. Ahmed, who has previously been a Pakistani civil servant and most recently now is in the US as a professor in Washington, D.C., but is the author of many works on Islam and his recent bestseller, The Thistle and the Drone. As the Indian Prime Minister prepares to go to the US for his meeting with President Barack Obama, Indo-US ties are expected to move to the next level, with India more than willing to give US greater facilities for nuclear commerce and defense production and access to India's large defense market. But the big question is, what will India get in return?
This may be Manmohan Singh's last diplomatic visit to the US as the Prime Minister. And it seems like he's doing everything possible to ensure that America is not rubbed the wrong way, going out of his way to push the American agenda, even before he meets Obama in Washington next week. A top-secret note accessed by Times Now reveals how the Indian government was willing to bypass the Atomic Energy Commission by taking a nuclear deal proposal straight to the Cabinet Committee on Security.
The Nuclear Liability Authority Bill has been passed, and thereafter the rules have been framed. The Act is in force, rules are in force. Where is the question of bypassing everything?
It is a proposed 100 crore Indo-US deal for 6 nuclear reactors that the government is keen on pushing before the PM meets the American president. Incidentally, without even conducting the viability analysis.
They can bypass anyone, but they can't bypass the law of the country. If the government of India wants to succumb to American pressure on this matter, I'm afraid they will be shown up to be having done an illegal act, and which will be against the interests of the country.
The Americans have just sold India transport aircraft worth $7 billion, and when Ashton Carter was here, there was talk of more deals. While India may have picked France for the $10 billion Rafale aircraft deal, America hasn't exactly got a bad bargain. The US has muscled out France and even Russia, India's long-term rough weather partner, in bagging defense contracts worth $8 billion from India in recent years. Under sustained pressure from the Obama administration and intense lobbying by the American nuclear suppliers, the UPA-2 government is looking to effectively neutralize a key provision of India's nuclear liability law. If the Attorney General G.E. Vahanvati's views of limited liability are taken into consideration, then in case of an accident caused by faulty equipment, the American reactor suppliers would virtually go scot-free.
If we find that damage has been caused by negligence or neglect on the part of the supplier, that the law provides for right to recourse, which is the clause that we are going to waive in this particular one. We are going to tell them that, well, you can forget about it.
While India is trying hard to sustain America as an ally, it isn't exactly getting what it desires from the US in the form of intelligence sharing on terrorist activities. Is India getting a raw deal? The question is, do we have to bend over backwards to engage Washington ahead of the key visit by Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh to America?
While nuclear trade and commerce and defense production is one thing, but for many Indians, the test of Indo-US relations is to what extent will America back India in its fight against terror, especially terror that comes to India from across the borders. And to answer a range of questions on Indo-US relations, we have with us Miss Lisa Curtis, a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. Ms. Curtis, my first question. Cynics are often of the view that being a democracy isn't enough to win over America's friendship, but if you do ties with America, which gives benefits to America's industry, particularly its defense industry, then it's another ball game altogether. And more specifically, Obama administration officials are of the view that they want to move India and US relations to the next level. What would this imply?
Well, I think there's great interest in the U.S. in expanding ties with India. I think the U.S. realizes that India can be a stabilizing power in the broader Asia context, and that there are several converging interests that the U.S. and India have, both being democracies, as you mentioned, but also being interested in fighting terrorists and a whole host of other issues, securing the maritime waters. So there are many common interests that the U.S. and India have. Now, when you look at the upcoming visit of Prime Minister Singh, I will say that the expectations of the U.S. are probably slightly lower than they were 4 years ago when he made his famous state visit to the U.S. during Obama's first term. So I think that the U.S. has lowered its expectations somewhat because of developments over the last few years, whether it be the adoption of legislation, the nuclear liability legislation in India, which is basically shutting U.S. companies out of India's civil nuclear sector, or India's decision to go with French rather than American fighter aircraft, a decision it made in 2011. I think these things, and along with the fact that India's growth is starting to lag behind expectations, have meant that there are tempered expectations for this visit. But that said,
if I may come in, you had expressed the fact about, the nuclear deal hasn't really happened to U.S. expectations. India's growth has slowed down. Growth has slowed down all over the world, as we know. But more importantly, in the absence of nuclear trade and commerce, India has gone out of its way to give American companies a number of defense deals. In the last 10 years, they have exceeded $10 billion, which is about the equivalent of the mother of all deals, which was meant to be the fighter jet deal, which was given to the French. And now, with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh expected to sign more deals, it is being expected that Indo-US defense deals are going to be in the range of $15 billion. So do you think this isn't payback enough for everything that America has been doing for India?
Well, I think it's wrong to look at this as payback. For any strategic relationship to take off, I think there has to be a strong foundation of defense ties and defense trade. And so certainly, I think it's in both countries' mutual interest to build this defense relationship. And certainly, I think India is interested in co-development, joint production of weapon systems. And this is something that the U.S. is actually considering. So hopefully there'll be some kind of announcement in this regard with the upcoming visit. The Deputy Defense Secretary, Ash Carter, was just in India. He sounded pretty positive in terms of the talks that have been going on the defense trade initiative. So I think rather than looking at this as a quid pro quo, I think we should be looking at the overall relationship and the contribution that the defense relationship makes in particular. And I think this is an area where things seem to be moving forward. And yes, as I said, it was a disappointment, the MMRCA deal, but as you said, there have been many other contracts signed, and it looks like we may be looking at additional contracts, but I think Russia still is India's largest defense supplier. That is still the fact, despite the improvement in the relationship with the U.S.
Well, in terms of U.S.-India relations in Asia, really the example of U.S. relations with Japan seems to worry some people in India that despite a long-standing relationship with Japan, the Americans weren't really able to put their shoulder behind Japan completely when the standoff took place recently between Japan and China over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. So people in India are a bit cautious about to what extent can we go into an embrace with the US and to what extent we will get support from the US in international forums.
Well, of course, each side is going to have its questions about the relationship and how much confidence they can have in it. But I think the civil nuclear deal really showed that the U.S. had a great deal of confidence in India and confidence in the relationship. And so the hope is that India will have that same kind of confidence in the U.S. and in their ties together. And I think you could make the argument that, if there are problems between Japan and China, as you were talking about, over the Senkaku Islands, that this is even more reason why the U.S. and India need to enhance their relationship in order to deter China from considering taking an aggressive posture, whether it be on India's land borders or with regard to its maritime claims. So I think you've just made the case for why India and the U.S. should be looking for ways to enhance the relationship, overcoming some of the obstacles that they have faced over the last couple of years, trying to deal with this nuclear liability issue. I think this is important. I think we do need to see some kind of announcement during Prime Minister Singh's visit to restore confidence in the relationship and the kind of potential that people saw it as having 4 years ago.
Well, thank you, Ms. Curtis, for all those detailed answers. Clearly, from Washington's perspective, Indo-US ties are more about how fast India will move on allowing America to do nuclear commerce and trade with India and the co-production of defense equipment for American companies in India. As far as India is concerned, most people are more interested in will Washington ever be able to tame and discipline Pakistan.